How would your relationships be different with the people in your church if they were all that you had? If they were the only Christians you knew and could rely on? Would it change the way that you got along? Welcome back to Dining Room Devos with Pastor Jeff Estep. Today we're looking at 1 Peter 4, verses 8 and 9. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. You know, I hope that you get along well with most of the people in your church. But I think the reality for most of us is that if we ever got mad at the people in our church, we could probably leave and find another church nearby that would welcome us in, right? I mean, there's a lot of churches around. I mean, I live in a very small town, and there's like 7 churches here. We have to remember as we read 1 Peter that he's not writing to like one little congregation out of many congregations in an area, but instead he's writing to the one church that exists wherever his letter is read. I mean, in most places in the first century that received Peter's letter, the Christians that you worshiped with were the only ones nearby. They were all you had. Now, Peter's already told the believers to love each other. He did that in chapter 1, verse 22, and we looked at that in video 10. And here Peter reminds us to love each other deeply. And that word deeply, I think, is important. I mean, think of swimming. God has made us people fairly buoyant, right? I mean, whether we're good swimmers or terrible swimmers, we get in water, and for the most part, we stay pretty close to the surface. I mean, to swim down, you really have to try. Depth takes effort. And loving deeply takes effort as well. And it means finding new ways to show your love to one another. And here in this passage, Peter mentions 2. The first he talks about is forgiveness. He says in verse 8 that we should love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Covering over a multitude of sins refers to forgiveness. And Peter here quotes Proverbs 10:12, which says that love covers over all wrongs. Now, what Peter means by love covering over a multitude of sins is that we must show the same grace and forgiveness towards others that Christ has shown to us. God's love and grace has covered over all of our sins, every single one of them. You know, other people, they may have committed a multitude of sins against us, right? And may have caused us a lot of pain, but Christ expects us to forgive as he did. In fact, Jesus said that if we don't forgive others, we won't be forgiven of our sins. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean that we pretend that the other person hasn't hurt us, even sometimes very deeply. I mean, quite the opposite. Forgiveness is recognizing and identifying the hurt that they've caused, but choosing to cancel the debt anyways. And one of the greatest ways we can show love to other believers is to forgive them for their faults and their sins against us and be committed to building a stronger friendship with them. It's said that when Leonardo da Vinci was painting his famous work, The Last Supper, that at that time he was in a bitter feud with a fellow painter in town. And it was such a woundedness in that relationship. Leonardo was so angry at this other painter that when he went to paint the face of Judas Iscariot, he used the face of this other painter. And so, of course, as people are watching Da Vinci work on this painting, they recognize that other painter's face as the face of the person that betrayed Jesus. Imagine that. But as Da Vinci continued to work on the painting, he realized that he was having a really hard time painting the face of Jesus. And as he thought about it, he realized it was because of the hatred that he was holding towards that other painter. And only when he let go of his anger and he painted a different face over Judas could he bring himself to paint Christ. Look, we won't see Jesus if we don't learn to forgive. Another way that we show love is addressed in verse 9. He says, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. He says, offer hospitality. Now let's be honest. Hospitality today is not always something we offer. It's usually something that we buy. I mean, in the U.S., in 2017, the hospitality industry was $1.6 trillion. That's trillion with a T. But in Peter's day, there weren't a lot of Holiday Inn Expresses. There were some inns, but they were usually uncomfortable and often unsafe. In the ancient world, when you traveled, you likely stayed with friends or with family. But when Christians traveled, they stayed with other Christians, even if they didn't know them. And so whether it was a meal or a place to lay your head, Christians were expected to welcome one another. And then Peter adds, offer hospitality, but do it without grumbling, meaning do it cheerfully. Don't complain if they don't take off their shoes at the door, if they snore, if they stay a couple days longer than you wish. Now, today in the 21st century, hospitality may not be as much about inviting in strangers, but it may involve inviting someone over for dinner, taking care of their kids, or maybe even taking them a meal after they get out of the hospital. Maybe it involves hosting a Bible study in your living room. The what isn't as important as the how and the why. How we show hospitality is that we make others feel welcome and loved. And why we do it is that Christ has welcomed us into his family. And so we are blessed to be able to welcome others into ours. As Jesus said in Matthew 25:35, I was a stranger, and you invited me in. So 2 questions as we close today. First of all, who do you need to forgive? Is there a name that comes to mind? Maybe it's time to offer that forgiveness. And second, how can you deepen your love by offering hospitality to others? Maybe the person you need to invite over is the person you need to forgive. Thanks for watching our video today. Feel free to leave a comment, share the video with somebody else. Visit us at newparisfirst.com, or we'd love to invite you and show hospitality to you if you came to our church at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. May God bless you. Take care.